We're absolutely delighted to be joined today by Stephen Trauber. Steve is a managing director and chairman and global head of energy and clean tech at Moelis Company. Over a 35-year career, he has advised on more than $800 billion of energy transactions across M&A and capital markets, spanning multiple cycles in one of the world's most capital-intensive industries. Alongside his work in investment banking, Steve has coached and funded one of the most successful AAU basketball programs in the US, mentoring young athletes, many of whom have gone to play on in the NBA. That experience has strongly shaped how he thinks about leadership, discipline, and long-term development beyond the deal room. He's also deeply involved in philanthropy and governance, serving on several corporate and nonprofit boards across healthcare, the arts, and education. Steve, thank you very much for joining us today. How are you today?
I'm terrific. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So I'm going to start right at the beginning. So you originally spent time around healthcare and medicine before entering banking. How did you find your way, particularly into IB? And at what point did energy in particular become the sector you realized you wanted to commit to rather than healthcare?
When I was in college at Rice University, I was a pre-med and I had the opportunity in between my junior and senior years to spend the summer, my internship that summer with Dr. Denton Cooley, one of the world-renowned heart surgeons, and spent every single day in the operating room that summer. And after I got done with that summer, interestingly enough, I concluded that I'm not sure I really wanted to do medicine. It was just being in an operating room and doing the same thing every single day, multiple times a day, just seemed like to me over the next 45 years, might not give me the satisfaction I was looking for. I tend to be a little bit ADHD from a perspective that I feel like I need to do lots of things. And while I was in school, in addition to studying medicine, I was also studying business and management studies. And I concluded that I really, wanted to do something different, which was interesting because it was late in my academic career, in my collegiate career, but I had decided that I wanted to do something. So when I got out of Rice, I went to work for what's now called Accenture for 2 years in preparation to going to business school and getting a deeper, more well-rounded business degree. And then from there, while I was in business school and doing a lot of interviewing as to what I wanted to do, I concluded that I really wanted to think about investment banking. I got a summer internship in investment banking with the firm back then that was called the First Boston Corporation, which is now called Credit Suisse, and had a great summer there, and decided to go into investment banking, and really enjoyed it. And um, and then that's kind of, once I was in investment banking, I started my career in New York, but ultimately concluded, because my wife who had met at Rice University, was born and raised in Houston. Her whole family was Houston, and anybody that knows anything about investment banking knows it is a full time plus job. I mean, it's when you're an analyst or even a young associate, candidly, most of your career is 80, 90, 100-hour weeks, and it's very taxing on family members. And if I was going to do that, I decided I was going to put my wife in the environment she was most comfortable with, which was in Houston. So I was able to get down originally from New York to Dallas. Lived there for 3 years working for Credit Suisse, and then ultimately moved down to Houston. And then once you're in Houston, you effectively become an energy banker because 90% of the business is in the energy sector.
So do you think sort of entering Houston more is more just because of life decisions and all sort of gave you that interest in energy rather than having a predisposition towards it?
100%. Yeah. When I went first into banking, I went into the mergers and acquisitions group,
Mhm.
and so I was doing M&A, and it was across many different industries. I worked on a lot of different deals across industries. And when I got down to Houston, because of the nature of the business that's in Houston, I started doing a lot of energy M&A deals, and then ultimately moved into the coverage of energy companies, doing lots of things, not just M&A, but also capital raising, IPOs, and follow-on equity offerings, debt offerings, etc., and really working with energy companies that were down here. So it was really that I was seeking to put my family into a good environment, and then I just adopted it. The energy sector is my area of expertise.
Very nice. If we dial it back a little further as well, your father was an Olympic swimmer, and um, growing up under that environment, I'm sure there's a lot of emphasis on discipline, on elite performance. So how did that sort of shape your relationship just with being a disciplined person, being a better version of yourself?
Yeah, no, you're right. He was a swimmer, which requires discipline, initiative, hard work. And I think that's the thing that my father instilled in me early days. And I was an athlete in school. I was a basketball player, but growing up, I was a multi-sport athlete. I swam, I ran, I played baseball, football, basketball. And the one thing that if you want to be good in anything, and that extends well beyond sports, but into the workforce as well, you got to work hard. You got to be self-disciplined. You got to have a lot of initiative. And I found that through sports. Obviously, my father taught me that. And once you get into sports, you recognize that real quickly. Many of the sports I ultimately gravitated toward were team sports: basketball, football, baseball, which also taught me teamwork, right? And how to play a role on a team. And so all of that, served me well as I moved to the workforce because once I got there, especially in the investment banking world, but really in anything you do, I can't think of anybody who has been successful in any line of work that hasn't had to put in the hard work, has had to, really sacrifice and on the personal front in order to, to commit themselves to what they want to do in the workforce. And I found that to be true in investment banking. It's actually one of the reasons that I really seek out athletes that go to good academic schools because if you can succeed in on Division I or two athletic basis and do well academically, you're going to do well in the workforce. It just teaches you those intangibles that are hard to develop in other areas. Doesn't mean you can't, but it's just harder. And those are the ones we just talked about: self-discipline, initiative, motivation, dedication, commitment, teamwork, all of those things that will make you successful in the workforce. And that also shaped my leadership skills. When I was captains on the football, basketball teams, I had to be a little bit had to be selfless, had to kind of put others first, had to put the team ahead of me or I. And then had to seek one of my leadership styles is really seeking consensus. I don't pretend that I know it all. I don't know it all. I recognize that, and I want to hear from others. And ultimately, a decision's got to be made. But I really want to get the input of others, and I really want to seek, input into, especially in the important decisions that need to be made.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And I think that humility also comes from sport. You're used to sort of not getting the outcomes you want. And I think learning that at a very early age, especially as you mentioned, being in an environment where it's pushed a little more than others, and I think I'm right in saying you're also the eldest of five. So that would have also influenced your ability to be a more effective leader, I presume.
That's true. I was definitely, the first of five children. And so, being the eldest and trying to be a leader within the family as well, set the right example for my brothers and sisters was important. But the other thing that's important about sports is that you have to have resiliency. You're going to lose, right? And losing hurts. And if it doesn't hurt, then maybe you're not competitive enough. You learn to be a real competitor in sports, and you got to be able to kind of dust yourself off, pick yourself up, and move on from a loss. Learn from losses. What did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? Did I prepare well enough? Did I give the opponent or the competition the right amount of respect? And you learn that in investment banking. I tell people all the time, in investment banking, to be number one in your area, you probably have about a 10 to 15% market share,
Mhm.
which means you lose 8 to 9 times out of 10, right? And that's hard. If you're a real competitor, that's really hard. And so every time you lose, every time you don't win a mandate in investment banking, you look at yourself. It's never the client's fault, right? It's always, what did I do or what did I not do enough of? What did I do wrong? And think about it. Think about the implication of the team. Had I not seen the client enough? Had I not thought through all of the critical issues? Had I not really kind of prepared when I went in to see the clients? Well, what is that allowed somebody else to do something better than I did to win the mandate? And sometimes, like in our business, sometimes it's rotational. Sometimes the client feels like they can't give you everything; they got to rotate it sometimes. But you try to make it as an investment bank. You try to make it really hard for the clients to do that. You try to do everything you can to provide the quality service, to be there, to be thinking through critical issues that they face, and try to be a problem solver for them. and then hopefully that over time hopes you hope to be able to win a lot more often than you lose, which in our business is extremely difficult to do.
It's very fascinating. You said that's a recurring theme on our I guess in our conversations. This idea of you don't lose, you just win or you learn, right? Only if you have the right mindset. If you're not gonna take everything, I guess, on the chin, and you have to really, I think, move on as well from mistakes. And as you said, you're gonna lose
Yeah.
mandates, you're gonna win some. You like you just can't open a bank tomorrow and expect to get a, let's say, the Paramount deal, the Warner Bros deal, or you have to lose a few for that and then reach that level, I guess.
Yeah, look, I mean, it takes time to build relationships in our
Mhm.
business, right? And you want to become a trusted advisor to your clients, but that doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
That happens only through a lot of conversation, a lot of dialogue, a lot of thought, a lot of thinking through critical issues on behalf of the client, and then delivering for them. And so that takes time, and we try to do that as frequently as possible in our job. And when we lose, like you said, we got to learn from it. Take the time to learn from it. We talk about that often in our group. What are the lessons learned when we lose? Why did we lose? We learn a whole lot more from losing than we do from winning. I just want to keep winning.
Yeah, no.
I prefer not to lose so much where I have to learn so much.
Mhm.
But look, the reality is, there was a deal announced today in the sector. Harbor Energy, based over in London, just bought a company in the Gulf of America here called LLOG. We weren't involved in that transaction. We actually were representing a different buyer, but so what happened? Why could we not? We talked to Harbor. I talked to Harbor multiple times this year. What happened? Why weren't we positioned to be able to win that? And the reality is, I'm not sure we ever presented to them or thought through for them the L log opportunity for them. And shame on us. Others did. So we have to learn from those transactions and learn from thinking through all of the possible opportunities that are available to a client and being able to present the best to them.
Mhm. It's very interesting you bring that up because I think having the right leadership ultimately is what decides whether you learn from it or not. And I want to, again, focus on sport because alongside banking, you've also funded and coached, as we mentioned in the bio, one of the most successful AAU teams in the US. So what originally sort of gravitated you towards that, and what has kept you committed to it over time?
It starts with my love of sports. I grew up as a basketball player. I grew up as a multi-sport athlete, but I gravitated towards sports and became a collegiate basketball player. And so when I had kids, we got them early into basketball. And I got my oldest son into an AAU team that I was not involved with, and then I got my daughter, who was my second child, into AAU basketball, where I spent a lot of time helping and coaching that team. But then when my youngest son, really showed an interest in basketball, having learned from my previous experiences with my kids, I dove headfirst into coaching, starting a team, coaching the team, recruiting players, as early as the second grade. And we'd have tryouts every year, and we really developed some great players. We had every one of my players went on to play Division I sports. All of them but one played Division I basketball. The other one went on to be an LSU football player. And early days, he was our best basketball player, but he grew up to be a size that he really gravitated toward football more than basketball. But it was a lot of fun. We had a great time. I look back now; it's kind of one of the great things I've done throughout my career was to really mentor these kids. The kids became family. All of their families became family to us. We traveled all the time. We were on the road traveling. 2 weekends a month. We were someplace in the country playing in the best tournaments we could. 1 weekend a month we were here in Houston. 1 weekend a month we gave them off. And we used to do that from November all the way until July or August. So that's a long season in AAU. And then once they got to be in high school, it really starts after their high school season, kind of 1st of March or so. But it was great. I mean, we did a lot of things for those kids. We number one is, in addition to sports, we wanted to make sure that those kids grew up to be strong academically. So we provided tutors for them. When we were on the road, we tried to find a church to go to so they had some religious background. It didn't matter really what the denomination was, but we try to show up for church, or one of the parents would do a church service for the kids. And then also we try to do something cultural when we were on the road. I mean, I remember taking the kids when we were in Arkansas to the first integrated school and teach them about integration. All of the kids on our basketball team, with the exception of my own, was an African American kid, and several of them grew up in, I don't want to call them busted homes, but grew up with where the parents weren't together. And what we wanted to teach them was togetherness, family. Wanted to really give them some cultural background, teach them. I remember many times we were in Washington D.C. and we take tours of Washington, teach them about politics and teach them about government. And I think that's one of the great things I look back now is, and we think about the teams and all the things we've done. It's been great. Now, four of my players went on to go play in the NBA. Two of them are still playing in the NBA. One of them, another one is hurt. In fact, I saw him this weekend. He was at my house this weekend. Justice Winslow, who played for the last national championship that Duke had in 2015. He's been injured, but he's getting ready to get back and start playing again. So, and then my two other players, De'Aaron Fox plays for San Antonio, starting point guard, and Kelly Oubre, who plays for the 76ers. All of them have had great longer term careers. They're still young. They still got some more years ahead of them.
What sort of prompted you to enter a professional field rather than going into basketball yourself?
First of all, as a player, I was never going to get there. But as a coach, it was actually when I grew up, I thought I wanted to be a coach. I love sports so much. I thought about going into coaching, and I ultimately grew up thinking, that you looked at some of the great coaches out there, the Bobby Knights of the world, and Roy Williams of the world. And you say, boy, that would be really neat to be a coach like that. But then you also, as you get older, you recognize that for every one of those, there's a bunch of them that are, having to move from college to college, from town to town, move their family around. For everyone like Bobby Knight or in my case, Mike Krzyzewski or some of these other coaches who do well financially, there are 10 or 20 or 30 that don't do that well financially. And so I concluded ultimately that, I could have the best of both worlds. I could have a great professional career and yet still be able to coach my kids and coach other kids. And that's ultimately what I did.
It's very inspiring. I think to have both a thriving professional career, but also a thriving, I'm not going to call it a side thing because I think you've done what many people would do throughout their career. So I think to have both of that, I think to manage that time more importantly and impressively is a real challenge, but also it's very inspiring. Um,
Appreciate that. Thank you. No, it's been fun. It's been great for my family. My entire family's been involved in it. And I look back at these kids and think about the development that these kids have had because of that, and I'm really, really proud of what we've been able to do with the kids.
yeah, even beyond your family, I'm sure they're very grateful, but even local communities, like that is what I think really matters at the end of the day, that people that don't have access to those opportunities, being there and facilitating that, I think is something that I'm sure has been very fulfilling for you, which we're going to get into later on the topic of fulfillment, because I know that's going to be a big one here. Um, I want to look at more of the differences between sport and finance, because again, these are both very competitive industries, high stress, perhaps one a bit more physically straining. But what do you think sport teaches that finance necessarily can't? And what would you say to people that perhaps are focusing a lot more on their professional careers, but not giving time to themselves to go enjoy and have, some fun playing sports?
Well, look, first thing I'd say is, as I said, to be really successful in anything you do, you're going to have to work really hard.
Mhm.
And to be able to put that hard effort in, that strong commitment, you need to have some outlets, right? You need to have some other things you do that can take your mind off of the stress that one may incur in the jobs they have, or just the sheer amount of hours and things to think about, the pressures and so I think having an outlet is really good. I think sports can be that, whether you participate in some sort of sport, whether you just attend sporting events, or whether you're coaching, right? And so many dads out there, so many professionals out there coach their kids in all kinds of sports: little league, softball, soccer, basketball, etc., football, and those are good releases. And it's a great way to be able to share one's experiences with younger kids and help develop them. It's not just about sports; it's about development as young kids and ultimately young adults, helping them grow up, helping them to see a world. Being able to talk to them about what you do
Mhm.
and what lies ahead and some of the commitments that you've had to make and what they're going to have to see in the future. So I think as I think, like I mentioned, the teams I've coached, being able to impart upon those young men that there's a world out there that is going to take you beyond sports and be able to provide careers ultimately be able to provide for your families is something that I think all of them have been able to develop. Just developing manners, developing professionalism in these as you develop, as they see you. You don't even notice a lot of times that they're watching you. You can talk to them about it. You spend a lot of time with these kids and their families, but when they watch you, when they see you, how did you get here? Similar questions to what you're asking me now. I used to get from the kids, and so I think it's great to be able to have that release. It was great for me to be able to have it. Investment banking is an extraordinarily stressful job. You're always pushing yourself. You're pushing your teams. Be able to have that outlet was good for me, and I know it was good for them. So, I think when you think about sports, I mentioned it earlier. I mean, just the development of teamwork, the development of having that commitment and that dedication. All of these kids, in addition to playing sports, had to go to school, right? They had to study. They had their family chores. They had other commitments outside of sports. But if they really wanted to be successful, and if they really wanted to chase their dreams to be professional athletes, and I would think every single child that I coach had in the back of their minds being a professional athlete. I don't think any one of them thought they were going to go on, into some other job. I think they all thought they were going to become professional basketball players. In my case, because I was coaching basketball. Um, but you need to teach them the hard work, the commitment, the dedication to being able to be successful. And look, so few actually make it as a career in professional sports, right? But doesn't mean that development as an athlete can't help you develop into a professional, really strong professional, somebody that can go into the workforce and use all the skills that they developed as an athlete when they're growing up, combined with their academic development to be highly successful in the workforce.
Very interesting. Before we move on to, I guess, more professional and talking about energy as a sector, do you have a favorite athlete or basketballer or LeBron or Jordan? I'm not sure. I just want to understand. Do you have a preference or a choice for favorite athlete?
My favorite athlete?
Hmm.
Well, probably, I'm a basketball player. I could name lots of favorite athletes. They're probably comparable to a lot of people. But I would say my favorite athlete's Michael Jordan.
Hmm.
Because Michael Jordan not only did it on the floor, he did it off the floor in the business. Through Nike and through the Jordan brand. And so he and his team, and his both, his agents and his managers and his parents actually helped them develop this off the court business that ultimately grew up to be a multi-billion dollar business. So his thought about what am I going to do post sports, led him to being one of the wealthiest athletes in the world.
I think that's the best answer there. He's very inspiring, both as you've mentioned, on and off the court. If we look at, I guess, energy now, there's a lot of excitement around AI and data centers, but there's very little discussion or far less discussion on the power grids and the infrastructure that ultimately is powering that. Um, what does the intersection of tech, AI, and energy systems look from an investor's perspective, or even your perspective, over the next decade or so?
Look, I think, it's getting a lot of play. There's not a day that goes by that I don't end up having to talk about data centers, energy demand as a result, power generation, or even local power, local energy needs. It is clearly on the minds of everybody in the energy business. It is going to require tremendous amount of energy around the world. And so when you think about that, you think about how do we get energy, how do we develop energy, how do we develop energy infrastructure to be able to supply the needs for AI data centers. It is clearly, it's the closest thing to arms race that we've ever had. We need to be a leader in the AI data center world if our economy is going to thrive long term. So, for us to be able to do that, we're going to have the energy and the power generation to be able to do so. I think ultimately it will evolve, but near term, we're going to need all the energy sources we can possibly have. So you're looking at renewable energy, you're looking at coal-fired power, you're looking at natural gas-fired power. Eventually, it'll be nuclear in some form. And my guess will be SMR, small modular reactors, and we're going to need as much of that as we can. We talk about needing a lot of energy. We talk about the need not only to supply data centers, But as we supply data centers and we supply energy around the world, people are looking also around the world for higher standards of living. We take for granted sometimes that, we in the United States and Europe and other parts of the world, the fortunate 1 billion who live in a developed country, who have a standard of living that is the envy of the other 7 billion that live in the world, right? And those other 7 billion want to continue to drive their standard of living. But to drive their standard of living and to continue to flourish, they need more energy. So the amount of energy required to continue to drive not just the data centers that we talk about every day, but human living in the rest of the world is substantial. So, I used to talk about energy addition, meaning we need more forms of energy. So when people said, there was in the last administration in the United States, everybody was talking about hydrocarbons having a finite life, and then we got to get to other forms of energy, and that was predominantly wind and solar, maybe geothermal, hydro, other forms of energy, maybe hydrogen. And ultimately, people come to recognize we need all of it. We need not only it's not just about energy addition, but it's all of the above. And then actually, a phrase that a friend and client of mine, Toby Rice, came up with was really the best of the above. Because what you want is not just all of the energy, because some of it is not economic. We need the best of the above. It needs to be able to be delivered to people. It needs to be able to be economic for people, and so you really need the best of the above. And that's going to require a tremendous amount of energy. And the AI data centers has just got us to focus on it more because it needs a tremendous amount of energy, and we can't just be focused on AI data centers. We got to be focused on also delivering energy to those that don't have a standard of living, that want to have better lives, like what I can call the fortunate 1 billion.
Oh, that's very fascinating. And if we look at clean technology, Moelis launched the clean tech group in 2023. I see you have the logo on your quarter-zip there. What was the thinking behind launching that specific, I guess, fragment of the sector, and how has that been so far?
Look, it comes back to candidly what I just said. We need all forms of energy that can be economic and can be delivered to the billions of people around the world. And that's not just hydrocarbons. That's other forms of energy. And candidly, we do need to think about making sure that the energy we deliver is cleaner, right? We don't want to have the impacts of CO2 emissions and greenhouse gas emissions impact. As people talk about climate change, and we can debate whether climate change is real or not. But what we can't afford is to get it wrong. So I think we can and are doing a much better job in delivering clean energy. And that means, cleaner coal, cleaner gas, cleaner oil, and finding ways to be able to deliver that in a much more reduced emissions with reduced emissions. But there's other forms of energy that also provide that. And that's the renewable side. And that's a big world unto itself. It's not just wind, solar, but it's the picks and shovels. It's the ability to deliver on that energy. And so we've developed, as you highlighted in 2023, we built out the group here within Moelis to be able to serve those clients. And many of those clients are in their infancy. They're early stage businesses that need a lot of capital. So we're in the business of raising capital for those clients, but it's also time to time it's mergers and acquisitions. We're in the market now with several transactions where we're looking at to scale, and scale can be done either by investing heavily into a business or can be done through mergers and acquisitions. And so we're working with clients now to accomplish both: scale through capital raising, but also scale through mergers and acquisitions. It continues to be an active group. Obviously, under the Trump administration, some of the incentives in the clean tech world have gone away or declined, and so it's become a little bit more difficult environment. But where those energies and technologies are economic and they don't rely on government incentives, there's still plenty of opportunity in the business for us. So we continue to be active and continue to grow that part of our business.
Do you think long term, given that, as you mentioned, the industry is in its infancy, very nascent, you can expect to see a lot of IPOs?
Yeah, I do. I do believe as companies get bigger and scale and get profitable, I do think you'll see IPOs, and it'll be in a lot of different areas, right? And we're even seeing some now. Even though we're in the, I mean, I mentioned infancy of clean tech. we're whatever pre-infancy, right? We're in that stage for nuclear, right? So you saw some businesses last week, TAE, which is a fusion company. Fusion's in its really early days, merged to go public through into Trump Media Group of all things. And stock performed extraordinarily well. There's a lot of interest today in nuclear and in fusion, and companies are trying to get into the public markets in one form or another, whether they be IPOs, whether it be through SPACs like Oklo did, or whether it be into combinations with other public companies like TAE did into Trump Media. And so I think, and the reason for that, obviously, is they need capital. Right? It's easier to raise capital when you're public, oftentimes. And so many of these companies are trying to get into the marketplace, achieve valuations that are better than what one might see if they're private, and then try to raise capital through the public markets.
And from a pre-IPO perspective, do you see a lot of the involvement being strategic driven, or is a lot of financial sponsors being involved at this particular time?
There's capital is coming from. There's an immense need for capital in developing businesses, and particularly clean tech. And so it starts off with VC, venture capital. It moves to growth equity, and then ultimately moves to private equity. And then ultimately, many of these companies hope to be able to be public and tap into the public equity markets. So, these capital is coming from every place you can think of today, including strategics, where some of these clean technologies intersects with existing companies, large companies. You're seeing strategic energy companies investing in these, strategic industrial companies invest in these. You see airlines investing, for example, in SAF, sustainable aviation fuels. You're seeing airlines invest in some of these businesses that create and develop, produce SAF and renewable diesels. So, money's coming from many different places.
Very interesting. Do you think people misunderstand a lot about the energy transition a lot today? And if so, what do you find people sort of saying, and how would you respond to that?
Look, I think the understanding of energy transition is becoming more developed. I think there was a huge rush into quote unquote energy transition, and people did not understand it. And I'd argue that the people that were speaking the loudest, some of these people were politicians, some of these people were in positions that of power and influence, were talking about energy transition and did not understand it. And what people believed is if you throw money at it, if you give it government incentives, if people of influence and power and government and politicians talked about it enough, people would get behind it. And the reality is, before you do that, before you throw money at businesses or ideas or science projects, you really have to understand it. And there were billions and hundreds of billions, arguably, of capital that were destroyed by just chasing it without fully understanding it. And today, I think it's better understood. It's still not fully understood. I think people talk about the world of transition, and transition, usually means you're moving from one sort of energy system or one sort of system to another sort of system. And I don't think we're really talking about transition. I think the word transition was developed and again not really thoroughly thought through. People thought we were going to leave the hydrocarbon energy system and bring a new energy system called the renewable energy system in. And the reality, that's just not possible. It would starve people. It would hinder economic growth around the world if that were the case. And today, I think at least people understand we're not talking about transitioning. We're talking about energy addition. We're talking about adding to the energy systems, right? And I think if people would get their minds around the fact that we do need a lot more energy, and we need it to be delivered to people around the world, not just the emerging countries that have a lot of energy. We need it to find its way to people that don't have as much energy today, that are burning wood in order to have energy and to be able to cook and be able to survive and create heat, or dung in some cases, right? We need to find a way to get energy there. We need a lot more of it. So it's really, I founded the term originally energy addition, and that kind of took off a little bit. But then, you went to all of the above and then best of the above. But we need a lot more energy. And I think the world is generally coming around to that belief. There are still, a lot of folks, a lot of, very strong liberals, a lot of people, woke people that think we need to get rid of hydrocarbons. Well, ask them about what the impact of getting rid of hydrocarbons is and see if they fully understand it. because it means they're not going to have many of the things that they have today in their life, and none of them are prepared to give those up. So I think, fortunately, people have started to come around to understand that.
I really resonate with that. I think just understanding how deeply entrenched the system is, as you mentioned, and then seeing how, I guess, dependent is the word, dependent we are on it, will sort of give you a very realistic take of whether there is a transition or, whether in reality it's an addition. I actually really like that. Very fascinating. Um, I want to move on again more to your career. So after you turned 60, you stepped away from banking for a period of 18 months of a lot of golf, from what I heard. But I'll let you tell the story yourself. And then 18 months after that period ended, you chose to return to the world of banking and with Moelis. So what was I guess what was the story behind that, and what sort of brought you back into banking?
It's a complex story, but in simplified, when I turned 60, I started really doing a lot of estate planning and started thinking about um, my financial position, and ultimately my family's financial position. Ultimately concluded I was no longer working to be able to provide for my family. I had provided for my family, and there was going to be plenty of net worth to be able to provide for them. And I turned 60. This job, as we talked about earlier, is very time consuming. Six, 7, 8, six. I guess there's not 8 days in a week, is there? 6, 7 days a week. I'm still at this age, still working 14 plus hours days. Um, but I said, look, what else can I do? I've been an investment banker for 35 years. What else can I do out there? I retired. I was looking to retire from banking and wanted to do something else. And I didn't know what that was going to be, but I did know one thing. I did know that if I stayed in banking, I was never going to find what that option was, because I just didn't have the time to go seek it. So I stepped away from banking and tried to figure out what it was I wanted to do to conclude my career. And I knew I probably had a good 5 to 10 years left with energy and passion, and I tried to think about what that was. I looked at various types of funds, venture capital funds, private equity funds. And for a variety of reasons, I concluded that based where I was in my career, it probably wasn't the time to start a fund. Probably not a great places, although I talked to a variety of funds about going into funds. I ultimately really started candidly looking at sports, started looking at a variety of ways that I could participate, because that had always been a passion of mine, as we previously spoke about. And what could I insert myself into where I could, be helpful, be value added, and something that I could be enthusiastic about. And I spent a lot of time, came close to speaking to some, and ended up speaking to some firms over in Europe, because there's going to be a Europe NBA, and there's some teams out there, and I thought I could be helpful given my knowledge here. I have a lot of relationships in the NBA, and I thought I could be helpful there. And ultimately, it was candidly probably a little bit too early and not the right jobs. In the meantime, while I was going through all of that soul searching and thinking about what it was, I had a lot of banks trying to convince me to come back, to come work for them. I didn't want to go to a big bank, and I had a couple of big banks trying to convince me to come back and work. Then I've been in big banks, and particularly the last job, a very large bank, and I saw ultimately there were a couple of boutiques that were trying to convince me. Ken Moelis, who I'd worked for when he ran the bank at UBS, was one of those, and I said no to him several times, and ultimately he asked me, he said, Steve, everybody in the energy investment banking business. I really want to continue to grow my energy business. Who should I go get? And I told him, look, the best guys in the business were the guys I was working with, right? And some of them had gone off to other places. And I said, look, I'm pretty confident I can get them to have conversations with you. They're not happy where they were. And so, long story short, he went and recruited a bunch of them with my help. We got them over here. And then once they were here, they kind of came up to me and said, Steve, look, we really want you to come back. I want you to lead this. And, having been 18 months, not having worked, as you mentioned, having been on a golf course, 5 times a week, recognizing that there was no way I could play golf for the next 25 years as often as I was. It's a great sport. I enjoy playing it. But 5 times a week for the next 25 years was just not going to work for me. So, I came back to Moelis and Company, and I must say it's been absolutely fantastic. This is an unbelievable platform, big global platform. We built, a leading energy franchise, now the largest energy franchise on Wall Street, I've never been busier as a group. I've worked at multiple firms throughout my career. I've never had as much activity and as much business as we have today here. And just a phenomenal team, not just phenomenal bankers, but phenomenal people. And when you put, really strong bankers that are great people together, that really want to work hard and want to work together and have the, spirit of team first and foremost in their mind and being successful, that leads to ultimate success. And so it's been a great decision to come back. I got to admit, I didn't think I was going to, come back and work harder than I've ever worked. But it's been fun doing it with, not only on this platform and working with Ken and the leadership team here, but also with the energy bankers that we now have on the platform here.
That's a very exciting story, and to see how I think I've heard of other instances where Ken Moelis has unretired bankers and got them, and then the impacts have been great. And also the way you described it is very nice. It's almost like a Jordan or a LeBron retiring, and then the teammates coming and trying to get him back onto the court.
It's some. I had a client tell me, Steve, it's a lot like it was a lot like Michael Jordan coming back or Tom Brady coming back for one last swan song. And look, the one thing I wanted to make sure, I had been very fortunate to have a very successful career and work with some great people. What I wanted to make sure is that the last chapter was no less successful, and with what we've put together here has been absolutely phenomenal. I would never have guessed we could be as successful as early as we were. But when you put great people together that are really committed, success finds it. So we've been very blessed.
Yeah, no, one central theme of this conversation, and especially when I was very cognizant of when I was writing the questions, was people, people, people. It's gonna come out with almost every answer. So I'm gonna ask you this question now. Usually I ask it in the start, but looking back, who are the people that helped you? Did you have any mentors or any senior figures that really shaped how you think and you're very grateful towards?
I have to start with my father. That may seem trite. A lot of people say that, but he was being a Olympics athlete when he grew up, being somebody who had nothing when he grew up, and having had to make something of himself, not only in the world of athletics, but ultimately in the workforce. And he became a chief financial officer for a number of companies over his career. But the one thing he taught me was hard work. And I've got a phrase, hard work pays off. People often ask me, Steve, how did you get to where you were? What would you recommend to people? And I always start with hard work. You got to work hard. Nothing comes easy. I don't care how smart you are, how wealthy you were born, what kind of family you were born into. Everything starts with hard work, and you've got to work hard no matter how gifted you are as an athlete, no matter how smart you are, you continue to have to work hard. So, my father taught me that. My father ingrained. My father gave me nothing. I had to work for everything. I remember the story I tell people sometimes. My father, he had a reasonable amount of money, but when I wanted to get a new bike, my first 10-speed bike growing up as a kid, he said, Steve, I'm happy to pay for half if you pay for the other half. And I had to go out and get some jobs. I had to work for it and pay for half of it so I could get my first 10-speed bike. And what he ultimately said is, look, if you work for it, you're gonna appreciate it a lot more. You're gonna take care of it, and that taught me a lot, right? You got to work for it. Things just can't be given to you in life. You're not going to appreciate them. You're not going to respect them. So that was the first one. And then look in the workforce. I'd say I was blessed to have worked with many senior people. I worked with a guy while I was at Credit Suisse and then at Morgan Stanley by the name of David Lumpkins. He taught me, hard work. I remember spending long hours. I remember one project we worked on, and I think we were working something like 140 some odd hours that week. I think there's only 164, something like that. I mean, we literally went home, showered, and came back. We're working on a massive project for a client. And again, it goes to hard work, dedication, commitment, service to the client. But he ingrained in me that that's what you got to do. That's the job that we signed up for, right? And then there were many other people along the way. There are other senior bankers that I worked for that taught me, service was critical. You got to serve your clients. You got to be there for your clients. You got to respond to your clients, which is why to this day, I never go to bed not having read every last email that came in. I may get home from a client dinner at 9 o'clock at night, and I may get home because my day has been back to back to back, and I may have 250 unread emails, but I won't go to sleep until I've gone through all those, which means many nights I'm not going to bed till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning because I want to make sure I respond to everybody that had something that they needed from me that day. And so that's just a commitment I've made. That's a service element that I've gotten to be known for. You got to respond to your clients. You got to be there for them. So I think that's all been ingrained in me by other senior bankers that I've had the fortune of working for over my 38 years in the banking business.
That is a fantastic mentality to have. It's not just about coming in for one mandate and giving a few decks and, having that advisory process, but it's also about treating them with respect and what they ultimately are coming to you for, right? Which is in many ways comfort, but also, as you mentioned, 250 emails in a day, people have concerns, and you sort of responding to that before you sleep. I think that's fantastic. And I'm sure that the mentorship you've had both with your father, I think I not in this conversation, but I have read somewhere else that he was an immigrant. He came from Israel. I think that mentality that, you're not going to get everything on a platter. You have to work hard. But also, as you mentioned from David Lumpkins, um, I think those type of things, they sound very like simple, like hard work, but it's very simple in itself. Like there are no shortcuts to it. So it's very interesting that um, constantly been a theme in your life. And I'm sure the people you've mentored have gained a lot from it themselves. So I'm sure they're very grateful as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I talked to a lot of recruits. In fact, last week I was trying to convince a couple of folks that we'd made offers to come join us. And by having worked 38 years, I have hundreds and hundreds of analysts and associates and vice presidents who have worked with me. Many, if not most, have gone on to do great things. Some are run other energy investment banking businesses, competitors of ours. Some are CEOs or CFOs or heads of M&A. Some have gone on to lead private equity firms. And when I talk to them and I get together with them, and many of them I haven't seen in years, and I'll run into somebody, there's a common theme that almost every one of them brings up that I had never thought of before until some of them started talking to me about them several years ago. And they said, Steve, when I used to work for you, I got to tell you, it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my career up till now. And it was a grind. It was really hard. There was long hours. There was unbelievable effort that I never thought I had. Um, and there would oftentimes, candidly, I really wanted to quit. And I got to tell you, I'm glad I did. And if I had to do it all over again, if I had to rewind the clock and go back, I would do it all over again. Because when I look at my career, what was the part of my career that helped me get to where I am today? And all of these folks have gone on to be very successful. It was those years working with you, and learning the discipline, the hard work, and the grind, and the effort, and the mentality you had to approach every single day with that got me to where I am today. So, whatever it is, we're doing something right. Excited that I've been blessed to work with so many great people that have gone on to many great jobs. I work with a very large number of people here that we try to instill that same sort of mentality to, and trying to seek success, right, and trying to provide for their families. And it's been a lot of fun. 38 years in this business has been a challenge. It's hard to believe it's been 38 years, but it's been a great ride. It's been a lot of fun.
That's great. And that brings me to my final question. Across everything, the coaching, career, your family, what has brought you the most, I guess, the greatest sense of fulfillment so far?
Look, I think at the end of the day, it's a combination of many of these things, but it's always been about helping others. One of the things we didn't touch on, and you mentioned very early in our conversation, was the philanthropic
Mhm.
things that I've been actively involved with. But it's not just the philanthropic. It's being able to, I just told the story of all the folks that used to work for me. We could talk about the families that of the basketball players that I coached. We can talk about my own family and being able to kind of, not only provide for them, but being able to develop them. Ultimately, and then all of the philanthropic work that my wife and I do and being able to give back to society, all of which has been not only because we feel like we've been blessed and we have the wherewithal to do so, but it's part of those that have been given a lot to be able to give back a lot.
Mhm.
And so it's all of that combined. It's being able to give back to others, whether it's in the workforce, whether it's through sports, whether it's through the philanthropic things that we do. we've been able to do that. So when you think about the impact that one is able to have, and I tell this to a lot of people, you know, it doesn't take a lot to have an impact if you just make an effort doing it. And you can do it in lots of different ways. You can do it in the workforce with the people you work with. You can do it at home with your family. You can do it in the philanthropic world. You can find sports. One of the stories we didn't talk about today was my foster son, who, was challenged growing up. He came to us, and it's a long story. I won't get into it now, but when he was a freshman in high school and he was living in the Fifth Ward, his mom was incarcerated. His dad was deported when he was a young kid. He's been with us effectively since he was a freshman. Was never going to go to college. We showed him the light to get to college. He became an All-American in college. Now he's in I think his 10th or 11th year playing professional basketball in Europe. He's got a family. He married his college sweetheart. He's got 3 kids, thriving. And so, that's just a sample. We weren't seeking to find him. We kind of found each other. Fate brought us together, you might say. And, we kind of pulled him out of the life that he had. And now he's living a phenomenal life. And he's changed his whole circle. His kids will be completely different because of that. And he's living a whole different life. And so, again, it's about giving back. It's about being able to make the world we live in better. I know that sounds probably egotistical, but it really is. And the world we live in can mean just the community you live in, can mean, as small as the family you live in, the neighborhood you live in. But being able to give back, and then obviously in the workforce as well, being able to develop younger talent into folks that go on to do great things like I've done throughout my 38 years in banking. So that's, long-winded answer to your question about what brings you most fulfillment, but that really does.
That's great. And I have read the story about Augustine, and I think it's very inspiring in how you can have a chain reaction of impacts just by inspiring one person being there. And as you said, it's not that tough. Sometimes it's just giving time. It's just being there for someone, whether that's emotionally or even just giving them advice. And as you said, you can have such a widespread impact. So yeah, no, that's amazing.
Thank you. No, it's been great for us. It's been great for my family. I know it's been great for him. And look, a lot of people are doing this. I'm not to say that I'm special by doing it. There's a lot of people that give into the philanthropic world. People go to the Boys and Girls Club and donate their time. They don't donate their money. But just finding a way to give back is so fulfilling. And I'd encourage all of your listeners to think about how they might make an impact by just giving back.
No, I love that, especially in an industry like finance. It's very rare to hear stuff like that, and I'm very grateful that I've been able to talk to you and see that side more. And thank you so much for your time. I know it's a very early morning, it's a Monday, so really appreciate it, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. I appreciate you taking the interest, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Thanks.